Hello, welcome to the latest RD audio recording. This week we were very lucky to have the opportunity to host a conversation between Katie Darcy, who listeners to the previous podcast will have heard of. She's one of the expert researcher development professionals that we use in Cambridge for our programme. And on the other hand, with Sue Jackson, Dr. Sue Jackson, who has been working with research students and staff in Cambridge for many, many years. Sue was herself a research fellow. She's worked in researcher development, both for the School of Technology and the Department of Engineering. She's also been a fellow and graduate tutor at Lucy Cavendish. And this week, the two of them were discussing the topic of resilience. Obviously, this has been in the ether, in the discourse a lot recently, to what extent we can and should be thinking about building our resilience during this slightly strange time. So in the following discussion, Sue and Katie share some of their insights and ideas, and as ever, we've included some resources for you to take this further. So if you're on YouTube, just look below and they're included in the references there. So I hope that you find this conversation as interesting and thought-provoking as I did. And if you found it useful, then do please leave a comment or tweet us or send us an email. And if you have suggestions for further recordings that you think would be useful, then we'd love to hear from you.
So, hi Katie, good to see you. I just feel it's a really good time to talk about resilience and think about what we've discovered about resilience, because with background stress levels being so high, then it's a good time to work on ways that we can all increase our resilience. And I think both of us have found through looking at this topic that this is actually something that can be learned and that we can prepare for to be stronger. I mean, for me, resilience means being strong. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's two interesting points in what you've just said, Sue. The first one is, I think of it, as you say, as being strong or robust. And I also think of it as, you see a lot of the explanations of resilience being about being able to bounce back from hardship, trauma, negative events, etc. But one useful thing I saw a long time ago was about thinking of it more as bouncing forward, and that you're not trying to return to a past place, because actually that's a source of anxiety in itself, and thinking more about actually bouncing forward and accepting, if not embracing, change, because resilience is actually all about change.
Yes, and all of us find change hard. It's a sort of programmed into humans that don't like change. But thinking about things in the past are something that we have no control over. We can't control what happened in the past. What's happened in the past is done. And so one of the important things that comes out of training yourself to be resilient, learning to be resilient, is working on things that you have some control over, things that you can influence. And I know we both read Stephen Covey's book, and for me that's a Bible, The 7 Habits of Effective People. And it starts off with being proactive, recognizing that there are some things that you can influence, and then there are a whole lot of other things that are just happening that we can't do anything about. And that's the situation we're all in at the moment. There's this whole world that's working on the pandemic. The pandemic is happening, but that's not something that we can do anything about. But there are things that we can do to maintain our strength in that situation and cope with the change.
Yeah, I know in previous conversations that you and I have had, you brought up the point that Covey had made about sort of your circles of influence and the things that you can control and the things that you can't, and being aware of that. And I think that's really important. And we sort of hear the phrase of accept the things that you cannot change and change the things that you can, banded around. And I think that's a really excellent starting point, is checking into that, of what do I have control over. And in most things that we talk about with personal development, what we come back to is that the only thing really you have control over to change is yourself. is your way of thinking, your way of practice, even your behavior. And that's not me saying that's easy. That's actually very hard, and it requires a lot of time and effort to do that. But what I hope we do in this talk is actually give some people some practical things that they can do to actually do that, rather than just sort of glib sentences of, be stronger, etc. I think what we're all yearning for in these moments of times being challenging is, well, what does that actually look like? What do I have to do? What do I have to practice in order to be stronger, in inverted commas, or more resilient?
And I think that's one of the positives, if you like, of the situation that we find ourselves in, is that we all have more time to think, and to think what is important to us and what do we value. And that's not normally something that happens. So I think that's a positive, and actually just keeping a bit of a positive mindset. Think of the positive things that are happening rather than dwelling on all the bad things, is one of the things that we can do. And so with Stephen Covey, he says that proactive people work on things they can do something about, which is what we've both just said. But reactive people work on the weaknesses of others and are always blaming and accusing other people for their things. So I think that's certainly something we can do, is to think, what is it? Why is this happening? And what can I do about it, rather than blaming somebody else or the circumstances.
Yeah, that, to be honest, that point really actually opens the lid on so many points to do with resilience. The first one is, I think, checking in with emotions. Of the reason why we're often talking about resilience is because people are having emotions that they are struggling to deal with. So whether that might be frustration or anger or jealousy or anxiety, what we're really talking about with resilience is, how do I cope with those emotions? And I think the first thing is, we have to realize that we're not trying to erase or dampen those emotions. Those emotions are there to tell us a story, and we need to check in and examine why those stories exist. That emotion is there to tell you that something is wrong in your environment that is causing that negative emotion. And then mixed with that, the positivity, the positive thinking that you're referencing, that Covey did talk about, other people also have come up. So one of the overarching themes of resilience, when you look at different texts, is to do with gratitude and to do with positive thinking, is to not get stuck down the rabbit hole of negative thought. The Resilience Project by Hugh I think it's Cuylenberg. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce his surname, unfortunately. But if you look at the Resilience Project, he talks about, he's got a little model for resilience, which is GEM, which is gratitude, empathy, and mindfulness. And the first one is gratitude. And one of the things that he's talked about that I thought was quite interesting is that we're 7 times more likely to focus on negative things than positive. So that's why gratitude is a practice. You have to actually engage with thinking about things that you are happy about or grateful for within your day, and writing those down. Again, with some of the talks I've done with Steve, we keep coming back to that writing is a very powerful form for consolidation, and so writing those things down, whether it's in an app or whether it's on paper, is a really good way of thinking about that. The other one, just to quickly link to, is if you listened to mine and Steve's talk about procrastination, I referenced a book by Fogg called The Tiny Habits. And in there, one of the things I didn't talk about in that podcast, but he does bring up later, is about that that habit change is also about celebrating when you have done something, and that it has to actually be a celebration. You have to be like, woohoo, Katie, well done, you did it. And again, that sounds so cringeworthy. I read it and was like, oh, I can't imagine doing that. But actually, it really reinforces you. And what he also talks about is, don't worry about it feeling disingenuous to begin with. It's a really important practice to celebrate when you have done something, because it actually reinforces the habit. And so gratitude and celebration are practices which you should build into your day, of saying thank you for things that already exist, and also celebrating the things that you have been able to achieve.
Yes, I think that's a really important point. And so people do talk about keeping a feel-good journal, all the good things that have happened. So and writing things down. I absolutely agree that You can think all sorts of things, but once you write them down, then you can start to be rational about them and to make some decisions. And in terms of just learning how to control your emotions, I think that's a really important factor in building resilience. And the person that the book that I really like is the one with Steve Peters. So he's the guy who coached the Sky cycling team, I think, to their victory. He works with sports people, and of course they're constantly having to cope with not winning or coming last or something going wrong. So he works with them about that, and he's got this very simple model of how the brain works. And so basically, the first thing to kick in when something happens is what he calls it the chimp. It's the bit of the primeval bit of your brain that is reacting it's sort of in fear or flight mode. So the first reaction you have is to be angry or upset or just totally not rational. And that's why you mentioned mindfulness as part of the GEM strategy. So, and that's about just actually taking time to, when something happens, take some deep breaths, give yourself time. So instead of reacting emotionally, which clouds your rational brain, you've got to start to be rational. So give yourself time to get the part of your brain that actually deals with rational thought, and kick the chimp out. So the emotional bit, cut that down. And once you know that that's what happens, and so when you're interacting with other people and somebody else gets mad, then you can just think, okay, that's not the rational part of their brain, that's just how they are. And when your stress levels are high, it doesn't take very much to tip you into that very irrational, emotional way of behaving. And that's been found time and time again. So when in the days when there was road rage, because there were lots of cars on the road and people getting angry, it could be that your morning started off with tipping your cup of coffee all over your shirt. And so little things build up. And so by the time you're on the road and somebody does something stupid in front of you, that's when you have an irrational, over-the-top reaction. So I think his model, his book is very useful in just thinking through, learning how to control your emotions, and then you can start to be rational about things that are happening.
Yeah, and I think the key thing there is about learning to control the outcome of that emotion, but not learning to stop the emotion.
Yes.
The emotion is so useful. And in Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg, the whole premise of that method is about having an observation. Something is happening to me. I'm having a negative emotion. You can do it with positive emotions as well, of course, but when we're talking about resilience, we're talking about usually negative emotions. There's a negative, something negative has happened. I've responded in a way that I'm not happy about or that is detrimental to me. And what we have to tune into then is, what specifically is the emotion at play here, and being able to label it very, very specifically. So rather than using a generic term like I'm fed up, actually, is it fed up, or is it angry, or is it disappointed, or is it frustrated, or is it embarrassed or shameful? And labeling it really specifically is incredibly useful, because when we label the emotion is the key that unlocks, therefore, what the unmet need is. And once we know what the unmet need is, I'm embarrassed because I don't understand, or I'm embarrassed because whatever it might be. That then allows you to know what change needs to be made, and whether it's a change that you need to make or whether it's a request that you need to put in to those around you. And if sort of nonviolent communication model of this observation shows you the emotion, that emotion shows you the need, and that need allows you to make a request. If that feels a bit too clunky to think in real time, the other one simple way that I often think about it is, what's the fear I have, and therefore what's the need? Because again, the fear is usually wrapped around an emotion, and that allows us to unlock the need. And that really is a daily practice of articulation. of how would I describe this? How do I get someone to see my worldview and therefore understand why this thing is difficult to me? And therefore, how does that inform me about how I want to engage differently with my environment and those around me?
Yes, and I think what you're articulating there is how important it is to talk to somebody, and of course we don't have access to people in the same way that we used to. But just as you and I are talking, to find somebody that you can just talk over and they listen, and that's one of the things that in Stephen Covey's book. He talks about first aim to understand, and that's about effective listening. So actually listening to somebody else. By listening to somebody else, you can start to understand or to ask them questions. So having that one-to-one coaching, really, relationship. Of course, it's you can do that. You can do that remotely with somebody, and so just to find, actually, to engage your support network, even though for some people who really are alone at the moment, just recognizing that your support network doesn't have to be a professional person. It can be a friend. It can be just somebody who will listen and actually just point out things or ask you, what have you done about that, or what are you doing about that, or what does that mean? And I think with quite a lot of academics, that's actually quite a difficult place to go. It's sort of too touchy-feely, really, but it's important.
Yeah, I think you and I both know, and we've both sometimes struggled with offering resilience training because some of it seems really trite. And it seems a lot like sort of just telling people what to do, but actually you realize that there's so many things at play for people of why they're engaging with the topic of resilience, that makes it really challenging, but it also makes it a really worthwhile subject to examine. And one of the things that I've been sort of trying to go over when we've been researching this topic for this talk, but also for the workshops, is to find the commonalities across all of the advice that's given. And I sort of hit upon a point the other day where I realized that a lot of what the advice is telling you to do is about preparation, is about setting yourself up before you need it. And your point about people and engaging and talking is one of those that, if somebody doesn't have anybody to talk to, if they're in crisis, it's very hard then to say, you need to talk to somebody about it, because that just feels like one more thing to do. So really what we're looking at often with resilience training is there are some things you can immediately do, regardless of whether you're in the middle of needing resilience or preparing for it. But there's also a lot of things that actually are about changing your daily life, and having things like people around you, people that you're happy to talk to. A friend of mine talks about people being tent pegs, that when they're in a point of their life that they need more support, or they need to talk about something, or something isn't going well, that they can refer to those people, and that they know that they will keep them grounded, they'll keep them positive, and they'll keep them moving forward. And so it's again that network issue. And again, one of my most loved pieces of advice that I trot out all the time is the Jim Rohn idea of you are the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. And I think lockdown is a really really sort of boiling pot of that. All of a sudden we're with certain people even more than we would be normally, but actually the impact of being with those people really comes out as to whether or not they lift us up, or whether or not actually they're another source of stress. And I think thinking about how else can you engage outside of your circle, and who do you need added in? Maybe actually you need the person that's just going to be your cheerleader, and you don't really need somebody that's going to give you some hard-hitting feedback. You actually need that friend that is going to be there saying that everything's great and brilliant and you're wonderful, regardless of if you feel it or not. But you actually just need that positive voice in your circle.
So one of the things for people who think this is a very touchy-feely sort of subject, it's interesting that this is something that's taught to the military. strategies for resilience. And so we've both looked at that, but there are various points made in that the military are taught. So learning how to accept change, which we've talked a little bit about, moving towards goals. And there's an important thing is what are your goals? And actually, again, we have time at the moment to think about what our goals are. Maybe our course in life has been totally changed because of what's happened in these last few months. And so just to reflect on what your goals are, and then taking some decisive action. So getting the information that you need in order to think, well, what do I do to make that happen? And of course that relates to being proactive, really. But unless you know where you're going, it's hard to be proactive and to take decisions and to move towards the goal.
Yeah, the goal thing is one of those where I think people sometimes really struggle with. They might have some idea of a goal, but they don't know actually how to get there. And again, a very simple method that I use in a lot of my workshops is thinking about that big overarching goal for this to happen. So let's say in a research context, it's writing a research paper, right? We want to write a research paper, and then breaking down, in order for that to happen, what needs to happen. And on post-it notes, physically writing down all the things that need to happen in order for that big thing to happen. So to do some background reading, to get my references together, to speak to my team or co-authors, to get some data, to visit an archive, whatever it might be, and then prioritizing all of those points and keep breaking them down until there's such a manageable piece of work or effort that you can't not do it. So if you want more details on this, you can look it up as sticky steps planning, but it's actually rehashed into all sorts of different project management tools. But it's the idea of keep breaking down the big task into much smaller tasks until you could immediately go and complete one of those tasks and tick it off. And then once you've done that, you can celebrate and you can say, fantastic, I've done a tiny little thing towards that project.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. It's something I'd forgotten, actually. I remember encountering that in project planning. So that's a very good tip. And so I just think that before we finish this chat, it's just important to just think about the other things, because we've been talking a lot about emotions and how you think about things and how you learn to be resilient through being proactive, working towards your goals, controlling emotions, etc. But there's all that other part of and going back to the Covey book, his last habit is sharpening the saw, which is his code for keeping fit yourself, taking time out to make sure you sleep properly, you eat properly, and you take exercise. And in building resilience, and of course this is something that the military also have to do, it's just keeping yourself physically in good shape, because it's hard to be in mentally good shape if you're not physically in good shape. So that's another thing that everybody needs to be thinking about. Make time. And personally, I found that when we had the instruction that you could only do 1 hour exercise outside every day, well, that was like, okay, so I've got to do 1 hour exercise every day, which has been brilliant, actually, but it's not something I'd normally do. So
I think that's fascinating. I have seen that for myself and many people around me who, the minute that it became that everything has been stripped away and that was prioritized and became a commodity that was very precious, everybody started engaging in it, and everyone's taken it up and done it. And I think that's brilliant. And going back to my breaking something down in order for this to happen, what needs to happen? In order to do any big task or project, one of the post-it notes that should be in there is about self-care, is about eating well, having exercise, being rested and sleeping properly. Those things enable you to do the bigger projects. So you can include those in there in order to break those down as well. And I think actually one of the benefits of lockdown is exactly as you said. It's made us think, right, I've got this half hour, 1 hour window of exercise. I'm going to take it up. And it's really important because it's one of the few things I've got right now. And I need to keep myself well, both mentally and physically. So hopefully that's a learning that we'll all take forward from here.
Yes, and maybe that's a good place to finish, because I think having a positive outlook, and you're pointing out some things there that we can be really positive about, and in a situation that otherwise could be pretty dire, and actually is for many people. But so are there any? Is there anything else that you want to say just to conclude? Because we can talk for hours on this.
We can. I think just in summary, is one thing is to not be afraid of your own emotions, to just touch on that again, and to examine why those emotions exist and therefore what the need is that you have off the back of those. The second one is all these things we're talking about, such as like a gratitude journal, writing things down, paying more attention to the positive rather than being skewed towards the negative, paying attention to the network of people you have around you. And also we've touched slightly on how mindfulness can also be really empowering, and empathy, and helping each other, and actually helping one another. The resilience project that I briefly mentioned, which we'll give all the full references in supporting information either in text below or in a document, they have an app which does cost $2.99, unfortunately, but what it actually does is a daily check-in, and they talk about that it takes 21 days to rewrite how we think about something. And so for 21 days you're invited to do a gratitude check-in. You click on an emoji to show what emotion you feel that day and explain why. You then talk about 3 things you're grateful for that day. You're also asked that if anybody is mentioned in your day of gratitude, that you actually share that with them as an empathy, as a here's some compassion, and making sure that those that you love or appreciate are included and that they know that. And then there's actually also a breathing mindful part of the app as well. And so it kind of does everything all in one place. So if you're looking for an instant way to just jump on board and do it, it's a really great little project to do. With that in mind, it said, if you mention anybody in your things that you're grateful for, you should screenshot it and let those people know. And I actually put working with Steve Joy and Sue Jackson on this talk, and so this is my chance to say thank you so much to Steve Joy for inviting us to speak, and also to you, Sue, to have the pleasure of talking to you again.
I look forward to talking to you again, Katie. So bye for now.
Bye for now.